as you prepared this word for us this morning, be with us and just help us to be able to hear your voice and to hear the words you have spoken for us this morning. We just thank you and praise you in your name. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. So, we've been talking for some weeks now about Jesus' plan for evangelizing the world, for saving the world. And I've called it a couple things. Jesus had a plan, Jesus had his plan. But this week we kind of moved beyond ourselves, really. I was noticing as I was getting ready, because up to this point we've been talking about getting active. As he was encouraging the disciples to get active, so he demonstrated, and then they were to demonstrate what they had learned. So, so two very crucial weeks, the last couple of Sundays, where we saw part of Jesus' plan was to demonstrate, and then they were to emulate, or to do what he had done. So this week we come to an interesting point in Jesus' plan. So we're in Mark chapter 8, and I find this passage very interesting, but there's so much there. But really what I want to demonstrate this morning is that Jesus, with those he was discipling, he gave them personal direction, just to use modern way of talking about it. He directed them in what they were to do. If you look in Mark chapter 8, there's a dialogue going on between Jesus and the disciples, and he had fed 5,000 people with, how many loaves did he start with? 5,000? Does anybody remember? Anybody remember? 5, there you go, 5. So there's a conversation going on between the disciples about how they have no bread, and let me just pick out a couple of verses there, and then I'm going to fill in between them. So 8:17. If you look at 8:17, Mark 8:17, Jesus says to the disciples, "Why are you discussing the fact you have no bread?" And then he ends in 8:21 with, "Do you not yet understand?" So I want to work our way from the fact that he's talking about they have no bread to, "Do you not yet understand?" So last time what we saw is that making, it's not enough to make this plan of discipleship an idea that we have to get busy doing it, right? Demonstrate it. We must find a place to start and then demonstrate Jesus' work in our lives. And I encourage you to do that last week and beyond. So when I said that when the church takes that lesson to make discipleship part of their life, it gets down to business with sharing Jesus with people, that we would see less and less people on the inside and more on the outside. I pray that's where everybody is this morning. It's not in here. They're sharing Jesus. But the fact that someone starts to work is not an assurance that they're going to keep up with it. Right? I bet you Hero would have some advice on that. The fact that your guys start a job doesn't mean they're going to finish it, right? Junior, same thing. You get guys started, you go on Monday and say, "Get after it." And then you take off and go, "Okay, I'm sure they're going to finish it just the way." Well, you have good guys probably, so maybe they do. But anybody who has a business knows that if you leave somebody doing something, starting something, that's no sign that they're going to finish it, right? You have to follow up, right? You got to follow up, or at least have someone that follows up. So once we as a people get over this, what I called last week kind of an evangelistic inertia, where you're stuck. You know, when it comes to evangelism in the church, we're kind of stuck. But once we start to move, I mean, you remember I talked about Barnabas statistics that have held true for over 20 years, that less than 3% of people in the church actively share their faith each week. That's like being stuck. So once we get moving, and once we get 4%, maybe 5%, maybe 6% of the people sharing Jesus, and then it continues to grow. Once we get going, it's necessary then to keep ourselves moving, right? To keep the movement going and heading in the right direction. So the initial assignments that Jesus gave to the disciples, any kind of initial assignments that are given, are just the beginning. They're not the end. Okay? And so I know I have teachers in the room. And I know teachers understand that sometimes you can't give the student everything to do at one time. So you tell them to do something, and you know in your mind that that's not what you're looking for the end, but they're going to come back to you and say, teacher, I finished this, and you're going to say, then go do that. Okay, I did this. So you go back and forth with that, right? Right? Some of us have even been to the point where we learn they're doing that and say, just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it, right? I'll get it done, because you keep coming back. But anyway, there's much to learn, right? Natalie just graduated, and now she knows everything. Natalie, I just want to tell you, I wish I was 18 again and knew everything. Because when I was 18, I thought I knew everything. And I'm sure it's a real cool feeling right now to have just graduated and to know everything. Because they gave you a diploma, right? Yeah. They said you know everything. Oh, that was a good... Doesn't that make you think back? 18, a diploma in your hand, just out of high school. All, life ahead of you, right? It's exciting. But there's a lot to learn when one's in school before they get to graduation, before you get the diploma. There's a great need for personal direction. And so that's what I want to consider today, this need for supervision in those that we are helping to become better followers of Christ, but also sharers of Christ. So, like I said, in 8:17, Jesus looked at him and said, hey, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? He said in verse 21. So there's three things that I want you to see this morning to pull from this passage in regard to Jesus and his plan for us to evangelize the world. The first thing I see with Jesus at this point where he finally has people sharing himself, his work, he keeps his eye on them. He keeps an eye. He made it a point to, and we see this through the Gospels, he made it a point to meet his disciples following their time of going out and sharing. And I showed you two places last week, one where the disciples went and shared, and then and when we were back in Luke chapter 9, and then later in Luke 10, he sends out the 70. But when Jesus sends out people to do his work, he always has a time of reflection, right? And when Kim and I were missionaries, we learned there is a lot of that. Every time you have a meeting, every time you have a discussion, you come back and you break it down. And so he would ask them for reports of what happened when they went out on their tours, and they would share with him how they were blessed, and he would share his ministry. Can you imagine that time of sitting with Jesus? Jesus says, tell me about your day. And the disciples say, well, I went out and I shared and I did this and that. And Jesus says, well, here's what I did. What an incredible time together. But the Bible records several of these that they had. I think they did it every day. I think they did it in the evenings or at the end of the week, whatever time. I think they came back and did this. And so, in a sense, what we see with Jesus is this separation of times between his instruction, right, and then his giving of assignments, and they're going and doing. He began to give assignments to them. And so the time that he was with them, he was helping them to understand the reasons for all the previous actions, all the previous things that he had done before them. And so why did he do this? Because he was getting them ready for service. He was getting them ready for more service. And so all of his questions, all of his illustrations, all of his warnings, all of his cautions that he gave to the disciples were all calculated by Jesus. This telling, this narration that we have in the Gospels, it's not just a simple. This is why it's not just history, recorded history. It's gospel. It's good news. It is a narrative, but it's the telling of the good news, the telling of the way Jesus. And this is all calculated. Everything Jesus wasn't waiting to see what happened. Jesus was orchestrating. Okay? He was in control of it. So this is all calculated to bring out those things that they needed to do in order to what? To fulfill his work. And which was what? To evangelize the world. You know, I think that's the mission statement of most organizations that are mission oriented, is to evangelize the world. Just, they don't say it that simple. They all have longer vision statements and such, but really, the mission statement or the work of Jesus, let us say it that way, is to evangelize the world. Just simply that, evangelize the world. So, not long after the 12 were sent out, they gathered themselves together with Jesus. And so, why? They're telling what they had done. So Jesus, they come together and they tell what they have done. And again, in each of these situations in Scripture, to me, it seems like he prearranged it. Like he arranged these meetings. He knew it was going to happen. It was on the agenda, so to speak, to break it down. And so the one in Luke chapter 9 that we saw last week was really the first excursion that the 12 had out to share what they had learned. So really it's kind of like what we might call today kind of like a field assignment. You've learned in the classroom, you've learned in instruction, now get out there and do it. So the first of many, I'm sure that they were to take. And so bringing those that are sent out to share Jesus back together today, kind of a regrouping of the disciples following this tour, provided them what? Well, a couple things. Rest from the journey that they took, kind of some spiritual time with Jesus. So all of these things to rejuvenate them. But one thing I'd love to know is how long the disciples went out. The Scripture doesn't tell us. I mean, maybe it was days, maybe it was a week, but they're going out into a very dark time. Much like when our missionaries go into places where no one knows Jesus. So they're going into a world that is yet to hear about Jesus. So they need to come back, have some time with Jesus, so to speak, to revive themselves spiritually. So the time element really isn't that important, but when I look at it, I always wonder how long they were sent out for, how much time it was. But what is important is that after the disciples were sent out to share Jesus, they were expected to share the experience when they came back. Okay? So get that, because this is an element that, and one of the things this week, this was very exciting for me to get to this week, because as I told you, I wrote this series of sermons fixing to go into the mission field And so I had been gathering a plan for myself to go in the mission field. And this really started to come back to me when I got to this week, or my time in the mission field. So part of the way I went about things in the mission field was very few times was it me going out and sharing Jesus. Almost never. A couple good reasons. I'm in a place where I don't look like any of the people, and I don't speak their language well, okay? And so, how do you go about things then? You find those people of peace that the Bible talks about, and you train them, and you share with them, and you prepare them. I thought about Manuel so much this week. Because I poured my life into them, and then once a week, every week, we came back together. And we had coffee, and we talked about the previous week. And I thought, exactly when I thought about him. That's it. That's it. And I began to remember the stories that he told me of opportunities that he had to share the gospel, and then began to remember the people that he shared the gospel with, that he began to mentor. So when you see second and third generations of this is when it becomes a true blessing. So here's the thing. This is a key ingredient when we discover where we got off the plan of Jesus. How the church got away from this plan of Jesus to save the world. One, we've got to get back to that where we're demonstrating Jesus and sharing Jesus. But then this next step is key. What if, now I'm not saying in this setting, or I don't know what the setting looks like, but what if every disciple of Jesus every week went out with this burden to share Jesus, but then knew when they got together with their mentors or their groups, were going to share the experiences that they had that week sharing Jesus? That would look very different than the way we come together. What if we started every worship service with a testimony of people's opportunities to share Jesus that week? That would look different than every single worship service I've ever been to in the United States of America, but similar to some that we've had in Mexico, where we give testimonies before we worship. Okay? I think that's probably somewhat what we're supposed to be doing. Anyway, I don't think there's anything. You think about this. Maybe you could think something. I don't think there's anything that the disciples then or us today could do to give Jesus more joy. I don't think there's anything than to share the testimony of those we're sharing Jesus with. I think we could sing and play instruments beautifully, right? And we can teach and preach the best we can. And that's all good stuff. But I don't think that gives Jesus joy like hearing about lives that are changed because we're sharing Jesus with the people around us. I'm just saying. Visualizing, this is big, I think, for Jesus in these times that he's with his disciples. Visualizing the victory. Think about that. Visualizing the victory assured that their work would succeed. I know not everyone in here plays sports or has played sports, but one of the things that made some of my coaches better than the others was their ability to help me visualize the victory. And I'll explain that. Visualizing scoring. Whatever the act is that helps you to win, visualizing that. there's some athletes that I have followed. And I have always thought some were better at this. I used to think that Beckham of England was the best at this, but I think Cristiano Ronaldo may be the best at this in the world. He's a soccer player, if you don't know. He can step up for whether it's a penalty kick or a free kick, and it's like he just stands there and he looks and he does it, and it's like, doesn't matter where the goalie is, or it's like, it doesn't even matter that you people are there. I'm going to kick the ball and I'm going to put it in a spot in this goal, and you can't do anything about it. And I've watched him do it over and over. Brian, am I right? Or you might have another player. But man, if I were going up against Portugal or whatever, I don't know what professional team he plays for now, but and they got a free kick, I'd just say, just give them the point. You know. So I could do this. I know all of y'all don't follow soccer or whatever it is, but the ability to visualize the act, scoring. Now, I will say, any of you that have played sports, I know you've done that. I know you've done that. You've visualized whatever it is that you were going to do. Or even you teachers. I think probably when you get ready to teach, you visualize it in your mind. You know what you're going to do. So whatever it is in your life, you visualize it, okay? So let's bring this in. Jesus was helping them to visualize the victory. Now, ultimately, the vision that he wants us to have is, can you imagine this? And this is our ultimate vision. Everybody says it's the Great Commission, and we have a Great Commission, and we talk about that. But the vision is Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. A multitude of people from every tribe, nation, and tongue standing before the throne, worshiping God. Can you imagine standing in a place where everyone there is a God worshiper? Everyone. You don't have to wonder, I wonder if they're worshiping God. I wonder if they believe in God. You don't have to worry. Everyone's worshiping God. That's the vision. That's the vision Jesus wants us to have. And I think if we can see that, if we can visualize that, a time and a place where everyone around us is worshiping God, then I think that's where we begin to get excited. And then there's movement in this, towards this. Jesus said in Luke chapter 10, verse 18, and this is right after the 70 came back and were reporting their journey, the 70 disciples that he sent out. He said in verse 18, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. That's the vision that he wants to see when we're sharing him. Satan falling like lightning from heaven. Because that's the result. Every single time someone comes to know Jesus. Luke records in chapter 10, verse 21 and 22, again, just after the 70 came back, in the same way, in the same hour, he rejoiced in the Holy Spirit and said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Simple people is what you could say there. Just plain old simple people. That was what Jesus had been working for all these months, about 2 years before this happened, that he had spent with the disciples. And he was now beginning to see fruit of his labors. Right? Not many of us are farmers. I know that because we live in the city. But, you know, farmers, it's a lot of hard work to get to fruit. You know, have any of you ever started hoeing the ground like in March when the almanac says it's time and the ground's hard as a rock and muddy and thick, and you're like, are you sure, almanac, that it's time to start tilling the ground, hoeing the ground, because it's muck and it's a mess. Some of you are like, I have no idea what he's talking about. Well, I get that. But you kind of doubt whether you should be tilling the ground. Won't we wait till May? It warms up and the ground. No, if you wait till May, you're not going to get any fruit, right? You got to start in March. You got to till that ground and get that ground fertile so you can get the seeds in. So that in June and July, you're bearing fruit. And a lot of you can remember, I know the times when the corn and the peas and the okra and the squash starts coming in and you're like, thank you, Lord. And you forget all about that hard, mucky ground that you were trying to till up back in March. Well, Jesus spent 2 years with 12 men and some other men and women followers, and they were nothing but hard, mucky dirt. Hard to till, hard to turn. There must have been times when he spent with them when he thought, are they ever going to get it? Are they ever going to be able to share with one person all of the wonderful things that I'm doing for them? And here, 2 years later, here it comes. He's beginning to see fruit. He sends out the 12, and they come back, and they say, Jesus, you're not going to believe it. Can you imagine Peter's face and John's face and all the others the first time they were sent out to share Jesus without Jesus to do a miracle, without Jesus to tell a story? They had to be the ones to do it. Can you imagine what happened? And we know that people believe because masses of people by the time we get to Palm Sunday are wanting to follow him. So we know there were people who believed. They must have been so excited. They must have been so excited. And so he was now beginning to see fruits. And notice, to show how Jesus was alert to make sure, to make experiences teach truth, because that's the ultimate thing, that the experience teach truth. Even on the occasions when he sat down with the disciples to hear their stories, he cautioned them. He said, and I can see Peter, I can see, maybe James and John too, because we know they got a little proud of themselves, right? Like they were going to be the right-hand men. Jesus said, now wait a minute. I knew this stuff was going to work because I'm God and you've got me. I knew you were going to be able to give people sight. I knew you were going to be able to heal people. I knew their lives were going to be changed when you told them about me. But I need to caution you about taking any pride whatsoever in your accomplishment. He put it this way in Luke 10:20. He said, nevertheless, talking again after the 70 came back, he says, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, because what they do, they cast out demons. I don't know that I ever have. I'm pretty sure that I haven't ever cast out a demon, but I'm telling you what, if God lets me cast out a demon, it's probably going to puff me up. I'm going to say, wow. But Jesus said, do not be impressed that you were able to cast out demons. This is what you should be happy about, followers of Jesus, that your name is written in the book of life. That's what you should be proud of. That's what you should be proud of. Another thing, so I really hit this one hard, the first one, but another thing I noticed is that there was continuous with Jesus, continuous review and application. Review and application. Review and application. We see it here so vividly in these follow-up sessions of Jesus that this was his strategy throughout his whole ministry. When he reviewed and experienced with his disciples, what did he do? Then he brought out practical application for their lives. And that's what we're to do with those we're helping to share Jesus. Tell me the story. Okay, now let me apply this and give you some practical application in your life. Let me give you 2 examples before we go of exact times where he did this. And then I'll fill in this Mark passage. One of my favorite times when he did this was right after the Mount of Transfiguration. I've been there, I've seen the mountain, I know right where they came down, right where they sat afterwards. It's recorded in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the Mount of Transfiguration. So Jesus was up on the mountain. Let me just quickly remind you of the story. Jesus is up on the mountain, right? and he's transfigured. And Peter, can you name the three that were with him? Peter, James, and John got to go. Okay? And so, so while they're up there, so just imagine this. Okay, get it. I've told you the stories how they've gone out and done miracles, right? And they're all proud of themselves, right? So the Mount of Transfiguration is going up. Peter, James, and John get to go up there. That leaves 9 of these men left to themselves. So what do they do? Does anybody remember this? During the Mount of Transfiguration, what they do during it? It's forgotten sometimes because you're so stuck on the story. What do these 9 men try to do while they're up there? They try to heal a demon-possessed man. So if you can imagine, Jesus is up there. The 3 favorites are up there. Let's heal a demon-possessed man while we're here. We've got the power. We're disciples. We're as good as those 3 that got to go up there. Let's go heal a demon-possessed man. And so he was brought to them by their father. And could they do it? No. They couldn't do it. They couldn't heal. The Bible says it was too much for their faith. And so Jesus returns. They come back down the mountain to see how things are. And his father's very upset that his son hasn't been healed. And so he's got a sick child, and he finds these helpless disciples. Jesus, of course, does what? He takes the boy, and he heals the boy. And he could have just stopped, right? This is where I'm getting. He could have just stopped right there. I healed the boy. Let's go eat. I've been up on the hill being transformed. Peter's tired. James is tired. John's tired. No, he said, wait a minute. He stopped right there. He healed this boy. The disciples were completely unable to heal this boy, but he didn't let the occasion pass because there was a chance here for a lesson on how they, through more prayer, right, and fasting, could have healed that young boy. And so they were lacking in faith, and so Jesus said you needed more prayer and fasting. So he gives a lesson here. Okay? Another favorite of mine where Jesus seizes this opportunity to teach is the feeding of the 5,000. And we find ourselves here just after this in the passage in Mark. So I don't always, I probably don't have to remind you of the feeding of the 5,000. Most people know this story. But Jesus feeds 5,000 people, right, who are gathered to hear him teach. And we know the story of him multiplying the fish and the bread in order to do that. Incredible. And so they're after this going across the Sea of Galilee in a boat, and they've already spent this time with the Pharisees, right, who came to him and said, give us a miracle, give us a sign, okay? And so what's going on here is Jesus is denouncing those who need a miracle. And having this conversation, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. So that's in Mark 12, just before our passage today. So Jesus is feeling a great weight because of the incident on the other side of the lake. And it's recorded in Matthew 16:6. He says, watch, disciples. He's talking about these Pharisees and Sadducees. He said, you watch. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now follow this. This is interesting. Now, we honor Peter, we honor Paul and the disciples, right? We elevate them. But they seem a little dull in their thinking back here sometimes. Or they're portrayed that way. I'm sure maybe we would have been even more dull in our thinking. But what are they thinking about here? They're thinking about their stomachs. They're thinking about bread. And so they're hungry for food, and they've only got one loaf of bread. How many loaves were left after Jesus fed the 5,000? How many did they were left? Okay, so here in the boat, they're down to one loaf. They have one loaf of bread. And so Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So they're thinking, well, we're not supposed to buy bread from the Pharisees and Sadducees? We only got one loaf of bread. And so we're not supposed to buy bread from unbelieving people? Where are we going to get more bread? What's going on here? They're wondering about where their next meal's coming from. So Jesus, once again, understanding that the disciples had completely missed what he was trying to teach them, the spiritual lesson in his remark, and what was he warning about? Was he warning about leaven or bread? No, he was warning about unbelief. Beware of the unbelief of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They're thinking leaven and they're thinking bread, and they're worried about where the next loaf of bread is going to come from if they can't buy bread from unbelieving people. So then we hit our passage, and in Mark 8:17 he says, aware of this. Okay, verse 16, and they begin discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Okay? Because if a person can't hear or perceive Jesus, what does that mean? Their heart is hardened. Okay? Our heart has to be made soft. It has to be open. So he's looking at them. Boy, this is not a little slap on the cheek. This is a hard slap in the face. Are your hearts hardened like all the other non-believers, is what he's saying? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, Jesus is close to upset here. Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? 2 years I've been teaching you. When I broke 5 loaves for 5,000 people. Here we got 12 men in the boat worried about their next meal, when just before this they'd watched Jesus take 5 loaves and break them and have enough bread for 5,000 people. How many baskets full of broken bread did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000. How many baskets of broken bread did you take up? And they said to him, 7. We forget him recorded in John when he fed 4,000 people with bread, and they had 7 bushels left. So, this brought to mind, here's what's going on here. This brought to mind the fact that with Jesus, and we're far from this today. We need to get this today. With Jesus' miraculous power, there's this ability to feed them. And there's one loaf of bread is sufficient. Jesus says, I can take one loaf of bread and I can multiply it as many times as I want. Why are you worried? And so in Matthew 16:12, it says, then, I wish this was all, and in where I put this all together in the geographical and chronological gathering I've done in this scripture, I put it all together, but you have to flip around. So then you flip from Mark chapter 8 over to Matthew 16. It says, then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of the bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. What if he didn't take the time? What if he had just, so frustrated, we're almost to the other side anyway. Why take the time to break this down and explain to them what I really meant when I said that? But he did. And it says in Matthew 16, which is later, that then they understood that he wasn't talking about bread at all. And so one of the most penetrating of our, I truly believe this is one of the harshest rebukes they get. And so one of the most penetrating rebukes of Jesus and corrections, I think, is followed by this great demonstration of patience. I think this is a lesson for us on patience with those that we're helping to follow Jesus. See, it was in a connection with their attitude toward others in work and not members of the 12 that this comes. It's in Mark 9:38 and Luke 9:49. And I think it's important for us. It seems in reviewing the course of their travels with Jesus, which is what's been going on here in this passage. They're telling of what happened when they went out. They run across these men who were casting out demons in the name of Jesus. Okay, most of us remember this passage. And evidently these guys weren't Baptists. Because they wanted to know what to do. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You're cool. What? They weren't of the 12. Okay? They weren't part of the 12. And the disciples want to know, hey, Jesus, what do you want us to do about these guys out there casting out demons in your name? And they're not one of us. They don't have the membership card. You know? What are we supposed to do about it? The disciples felt like they were doing the right thing, don't you think? Telling Jesus, hey, there's these men out here that are casting out demons in your name. And so they reported it to Jesus. And I think he felt obliged to give them an extended discourse on the dangers of discouraging others who are doing sincere work. We need to hear that. The danger of discouraging others who are doing sincere work. So in Luke 9:50, it's recorded that he says, do not stop him. For the one who is not against you is for you. Right? That's what he said. Do not stop them. And so then making the point, apply more generally to all innocent people, he mentions the children when he says, Mark 9:42, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it will be better for them if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. In Matthew 18:14, he says, it will not be the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Okay? And on one other excursion, the disciples met with one who was very resistant to their work in Samaria. Okay? Samaria I won't go into it, but we understand big hate for Samaritans. And so they reacted by asking Jesus, let's just call down fire on them. Let's just annihilate them, Jesus. Would that be a good idea? We've got the power. Let's just call down the fires of hell on these Samaritans. Okay? I hope none of you have ever felt that way about someone who was resistant to the Word of God or the name Jesus. Or anyone, for that matter, that you would want to call down hell's fire upon them. I get what they're feeling. They're so excited. They think everyone should be a Jesus follower. You feel that way? Increasingly, I see more people in our city that are Muslim. We've always known there's Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and things like that, but what kind of clothes do they wear? Do they have a Mormon in a Jehovah's Witness clothing store? No. They look good just like us, right? But when you see a Muslim, do you usually know it? Yeah. If their wife's with them, for sure. I have to admit, for some years now, I have felt a little bit of discomfort with that. A bit of discomfort. And now I see places of worship going up all around us that are designed for Muslim worship. And so we might be tempted when we see these people to say, let's call down a little fire, on them. Let's annihilate them. Let's get rid of them. Did you know that's what the Crusades attempted to do? When people in the name of God went to the Holy Land and murdered thousands upon thousands of Muslim people. And I don't know if you know this, they decided on the way, let's just kill the Jews too, because they killed Jesus. So Jewish villages were wiped out in the Crusades, just like Muslim crusades. Just kill everyone. And so Jesus has a word for that. I won't get off on this too far, but Jesus has a word for that. When they said, let's kill them, Jesus, because they won't believe in you, he says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the world. I won't do it because the Son of Man. When you see or when people make you feel like you want to call down fires upon them, we need to remember Jesus' words. Those are the people that Jesus was sent to save. Muslims are included in those people. So he did what? He showed the disciples again how to solve the problem. People want to worship another god. People want to worship an idol. People want to do this. You know what I want you to do? Just keep sharing me with them. Keep demonstrating me to them. And what did they do? They went to another village. They listened to Jesus and got busy doing what they were supposed to be doing. So let me stop there because I'm running out of time. But I would just say this. Jesus did this over and over again. And so how do we bring this into 2019? Jesus isn't here. He's not walking. What we have to do as Christians, what we have to do as parents of children, what we have to do as friends of others is listen. Okay? Listen for those opportunities to be Jesus in these situations. I can't tell you how many times in my life someone has come to me and used the words, Pastor, you won't believe. Right? And then they tell me something. And I don't usually say this, but I want to say, yes, I've seen that so many times, or how many times I've seen that, or been told that, or I already knew it. But I let people tell the story. When you get to these moments with, and I'm thinking of our children mostly, and the young people that we have around us, when we get to these teachable moments, those of us who are parents, those of us who are grandparents, those of us who are going to be grandparents, Jillian Brown said, well, not for a while, but but it's coming. But it's coming. We've been given an opportunity that is way beyond feeding and clothing and financially supporting younger human beings. We've been given an opportunity to be Jesus in their life and to give them this personal direction. So whatever it is in the lives of the people that God has given you personal direction over, there is a godly answer. There is a Jesus answer to every question that comes up. So when they come to you, or when you're in a situation with them, it could be the dinner table, whatever, and just ask you to do what Jesus did. Make all of these times teachable moments. Maybe this summer we'll slow down a little bit and won't be doing so much in our work and such, and there'll be more teachable moments with our children. And we can take this time to say, to be Jesus in their lives. So last week, I encouraged you, and I'm going to, just because the week's over doesn't mean the challenge is over, to get busy demonstrating Jesus in all the situations that God has given you. This week, I'm going to impress upon you to really begin to think, when you get into these situations, especially with your children or grandchildren, or maybe younger Christians, When you're given the opportunity for a teachable moment, for a moment to say, hey, wait a minute. Someone says something, someone does something. Don't say, well, what will it matter? Or we're going to be late, or we're going to do this. Just stop. Just stop right there, just like Jesus did. And be Jesus in their life. And give them that lesson, that teachable moment. I would say this. If you're not having teachable moments with your children or your grandchildren, you're not spending time with them. You're not stopping. You're not doing what Jesus did where you sit down and you have this time to break bread and time together. If you do that with them, you'll have teachable moments with them. Let me encourage you to use those this summer. Tell me about them. I'd love to hear about them. I know that there's teachable moments with Janelle because I know she's always got questions. And God bless you guys. Let me pray, and then we'll worship one more time and sing and take our offering and be gone. Father, thank you for this time and this place. Thank you for the blessing it is to be here. Thank you for the cool air we have this week. Pray for our air conditioners this summer that they continue to work, Father, and give us opportunities to be Jesus. Our children, our grandchildren, our friends, Father, our co-workers. Help us not to overlook those moments, those teachable moments that you give us. Help us then to let Jesus personally direct our lives as we look to the one who taught us. Your precious Son's name. Amen.